Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Workplace Wonder. I've had a bit of a hiatus here, a little break, a much needed break, to be honest with you. It was school finals last semester. Happy to announce that I did pretty well, so that's great. Um, but that took up a lot of my time. It was practicum that I was finishing up as well, which was a really cool experience. I got to work with MIT, building out a workshop on how to have difficult conversations with your employees as a leader, which was incredible to build something at that high level of education and really working hand in hand with one of my professors on how to build something for people who maybe don't maybe are great leaders in their own right and they're great at engineering or great at whatever it is that they do, but difficult conversations or having emotional discussions with employees it can be difficult for them. So building out this workshop, it was really cool for me. And then I just needed some time off. So I've been on break from school and took a little break from doing any work. But I am back here and very excited for today's conversation with Peggy Umbarger. And today we will be discussing clear communication at work. So it kind of builds into the difficult conversations piece that I was just working on. But I am very excited for this conversation. So welcome, Peggy.
Thank you. Thanks, Blake, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to have been invited. So thank you.
No, I'm so glad. And you've been patient with me as I was dealing with some travel issues last week. So thank you for your flexibility and thank you for joining me again here today. So, as always, I always ask our guests to introduce themselves. Just it's in an attempt to be more inclusive, and because I feel like bios sometimes describe our professional selves, but they don't include the full self. So, I would love if you can just tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Yes, great. Awesome. So professionally, I have been with Apple One Employment Services for 17 years. I
Wow.
started one job just after college. And so back in 2007, was hired in with them. They're a staffing firm. Didn't really know what that industry was, had never been introduced to it. But I was hired in as their office coordinator. A few months later, my boss was like, if you help me recruit some people, then I might move you into a recruiter spot. So then I filled some positions, moved up into the recruiting role. Then I started leaning into the sales portion of the business and became what's called running a full desk. So doing recruiting, interviewing individuals looking for work, and as well as speaking with businesses that might need our services.
Wow.
So then after that, I moved into account management, had a little bit of leadership underneath my belt, leading the my teammates and my peers, and uh, then in 2000, December of 13, moved into management. I was in one branch of Apple One and then moved over to what we call the South Orlando branch. And I've been running that branch for 10 years. December will be 11 years I have been there. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's a little bit about me professionally. I am a mom of two. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 10-month-old. So that's always exciting. And I like to exercise and read books and listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Yeah, I could tell that you were an avid reader when we were messaging back and forth. You said that you said your on times. And for people who don't know what that is, your on times is the time that you feel your best or that you're best able to communicate or you feel the most open and vibrant. And I said that I love that you said that. And you immediately brought it back. Oh, it's from this book. And I'm like, oh, she's a reader. I love it. I can't wait to talk about this. So I
Oh yeah.
appreciate you kind of taking what you're learning in the books and applying it in your life. That was so cool to see.
Oh yes, yeah. Reading, you find there's always like a theme or a golden nugget that you get to pull and take with you and combine with the other things that you've learned and make it your own.
Yeah.
But yeah, the on times. That's fun.
It's so it really like segues into our topic today of clear communication, of being able to state your on times up front for other people to know like, hey, this is when the fog clears for me. This is when the fog comes back for me. So you got to kind of communicate to me within this window and I'll be the most clear for you.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. It was recommended by, I think it was by my boss. She recommended it. And we were able to we moved our meetings to where we were both met our green or on time so we could be most
Oh.
effective when we're having like our strategic meetings and then versus when it's best maybe just to be doing our tasks. So yeah, really got
Hmm.
to practice it right away.
That's an interesting idea. I wonder how big is your team?
There are 6 on my team. Under my VP, there are 30 in Orlando. That's
Okay.
basically, yeah, where it was applied. But we have 160 offices, but it was just, I think it was just like the Florida region that read that book together.
Okay. And I guess I'm just curious because I'm thinking about how to scale something like that because I think it's a really important piece. I wonder how you scale that in a larger corporation when there's lots of, hundreds of people maybe. How do you, and you have bigger meetings, or maybe you just keep it when it's a smaller groups?
And that's the thing about meetings and communication that people zone out, especially if you're, in the middle of a task when you're on your on time and then you have to switch over to a meeting, switch your mindset, but maybe that's not your on time and now you're not your best and maybe you're zoned out a little bit too. So there's always that balance there and being, I guess, self-aware to help yourself through those times if your on times aren't matching up with what you're doing.
Yeah. So in your organization, how did they approach the on-time situation? Where did they take a survey, or like how did they find out like where is the cross section between everyone's on times?
I don't think ended up scaling it like you're mentioning, which would be amazing. Um, I think it was more locally with my boss and I because it both hit home with us and
Okay.
helped with our specific communication. But
Okay.
scaling it is a great idea. It really is.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's even possible because I'm sure you'd have outliers. I mean, there might be some general time, but it is still it's a great idea to know what if with your boss and what your employees on times are. So even you can meet their needs. And I think, again, I think that segues a bit into the topic of discussion here today of clear communication, of knowing your employees on times and not just your own, but knowing your employees on times and communicating that. I realize we didn't mention the name of the book. What's the name of the book that have the on times?
At your best.
At Your Best. Okay.
Yes, yes,
I'm
yes.
going to have to order that on Amazon. I'll make sure I put a link to At Your Best in the podcast description and the YouTube description here so people can go click on that and check it out. That sounded official, by the way. That's like a real podcast. Real podcasters do that. So I'm gonna start doing that stuff. Maybe I should get like an affiliate link or something.
That's yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're
Not,
talking to a lot of people, a lot of avid readers out there, you could get a lot of good product out.
yeah, that's true. That's true. I should start mentioning products on here. I have no idea how to do the affiliate link, but I'm sure there's also a YouTube video on how to do that.
There is, there is.
Yeah,
I'm
I'll
sure.
check
I
that
don't know
out.
about it. I don't know about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll check that out. Um, so I always like to ask when people bring up a topic to me, it usually means that there's two sides to it. So people become passionate about a topic and they start diving deep into it because of something that maybe occurred in the past or some type of situation that's come up a number of times that's really inspired them to try to fix a problem. Is there something, an origin story to the clear communication piece for you? And obviously, you could speak in generalities. I don't want to out anybody at your job or anything like that. But is there something that made you really start to value clear communication?
I think it's been at the core of who I am. And I always, I think, even as a child, like subconsciously paid attention to it and how things were communicated and how a lot of communication is nonverbal. There's nonverbal communication, physical communication, different platforms of communication, all sorts of communication. But I think that really is what drives me as a human being is understanding people and
Mm.
loving people and therefore wanting to communicate clearly and understanding, when there is communication, the ripple effects of that. When you've had effective communication and the ripple effects of that, and how when, something's maybe not so positive, you're like, there's lots of ripple effects of that communication. And then the other way as well. So I think even in college, going to UCF, I ended up with a liberal arts degree because I just love people and couldn't put it in a box and figure out what I wanted to do. So
Sure.
I ended up with a bachelor's in it was marketing communication, and behavioral and social sciences, which is
The three majors?
so in the liberal arts, it's three minors that make up
Oh,
your
okay.
major.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so I couldn't make up my mind. So I went to my guidance counselor. I was like, I'm never going to graduate. My first guidance counselor told me, take what you like.
Yeah.
So I did, and I'm never going to graduate. But she's like, actually, I look at what you studied and it falls into three categories. It's marketing, communication, and behavioral and social sciences. You literally need these four classes and you can graduate this semester. I was like,
Wow.
sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's just always been at the core. I want to learn about people. I want to learn about communication because you don't really think you can have a relationship without communication inside or outside the workplace. So
Correct.
I think I've always, I'm not a communication expert or have a certification in it, but it's a lifelong learning topic that I always thrive to improve on myself, share what I've learned with others, and want to continue to do, really. I mean, when we're talking about clear communication in the workplace, we spend so much time there with people, whether, there's good tenure or turnover, which then changes how you communicate with people.
Sure.
If they're new, long, and that's another thing too. If you have tenured employees, maybe you're communicating in a way that you could improve upon, but you've gotten comfortable.
Right.
Or there's that thing to be aware of. Or when somebody comes in and you're used to doing something because you have a tenured team and you have somebody new, maybe you don't effectively communicate for them as well because you know it in your head. And when you say it, you feel like they now know it and you move on. So, anyways, that was a lot
Yeah.
that I just covered.
No, there's a lot of good little tidbits in there, and I definitely want to unpack some of that. Um, One, I love that it was effective communication that helped you decide on your minors. It was like here's everything I've done, and you effectively communicated. The guidance counselor or whoever it was heard you what you wanted and was able to identify the minors based on your communication ability. So that's really a great example of it. Um, I love that you discussed the piece of communication about relationships and the human side of it, and how important it is for us to understand each other in order to even effectively communicate, to know one another, to recognize the humanity before we can even communicate effectively. And then there's also the third topic that we can move into of the power differential of, like, as you move up the ranks and you become a tenured employee, your power within the system changes. So then some of the areas that helped get you there start to harden, and they become less flexible. And
Yes, that's true.
so really kind of remaining green in a way is really important to effective communication.
Our owner, he said it's a family-owned business. Bernie, the owner, he has passed, and his son runs the organization now, really well. But his dad said, when you're green, you grow. When you're red, you rot.
Oh, wow.
So that is one of the things I've seen throughout my whole career. So I probably attribute some of my continued passion based on some of his learning principles too. But yeah, when you're green, you grow. When you're red, you rot. I'm like, oh, don't want to be rotting. And in relationship or communication, communication can be pretty rotten sometimes.
Yeah, and it's hard and challenging, and I think that's like the ugly part of communication. I, Do you think people mistake effective communication for micromanagement or over explaining, even maybe mansplaining, and some people would say? But do you think people mistake what clear communication is at work or effective communication is at work with something else?
Yes, I think there's a balance, and um, I don't think you can appease everyone. Everybody has different preferences, communication styles, but there is over communication. Some people are like, that's over communicated. We didn't need to go that far into it. But then also the other point, well, when we communicated it more simply, we keep repeating conversations. So I thought maybe explaining in more detail would help, not to over explain or make it something that it's not. So I do think that clear communication, um, knowing again the person, the audience that you're speaking to, and shifting to what their needs are, maybe
Yeah,
even over your own. And I think it takes a lot of inward looking too to stay humble, to be able to understand, oh, what I'm communicating is being perceived as one thing because they've said, which cues active listening, which is another piece of communication. So
sure.
it depends on, if the person that's over explaining, maybe somebody feels like it's micromanagement and they communicate it back, and then adjusting to that person's style of communication and being more concise and deciding which words or which, um, if you can make it more concise, really, for certain people.
Yeah. Concise. I guess what method of communication as well works best with somebody. Maybe somebody isn't a great active listener, but they're a great reader. So sending an email instead of talking to them over the phone or a text message. It's funny because I think about my progression into leadership and looking back, the amount of times that I was frustrated by people when I was like, I told you specifically what to do and you didn't do it. I just sent you the world's longest email with step-by-step guidelines and you didn't follow it. And realizing how I was expressing to people how I would want to be communicated to and not thinking about them and sending them these long emails to people who don't really like reading long emails or who have shorter attention spans or what very busy and don't have time to read like a 25-page email. And the amount of times that I've been frustrated by that, instead of sitting back and going, okay, how does this person, I need this person to do something. What's the best way to communicate with them? Or asking them, hey, I got this task for you. What do you need from me to be able to get it done?
Yes, yes. And I think too, knowing it does go into the psychology piece and the organizational psychology piece of communication, because then you're almost, if you're wanting to communicate effectively with somebody, you almost need to profile them. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their wants? What do they want in life? What is their motivation?
Mm,
And being able to speak to that so they can hear more clearly what you're trying to get across, which gets, you can't do that with everyone all the time. But if you're working with people in the workplace and you're building that relationship, I think it's really important to step back and really, um, okay, so there's an example with my even my 3-year-old the other day.
okay.
I learn a lot from my children.
Yeah.
Um, but we were into the library, there was a project, a little craft, and I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. This is at her level. I can help her with it. I was like, in my head, subconsciously, apparently, I went through this whole thing. I was like, I'll explain how it's done. I'll help her with this while she's coloring that. I had the plan. I was going to communicate it to her. We sat down and she looked at the craft. She looked back at her things and she just started. I'm like, no, actually, we're going to do this first, and then I'll help you with that. And she just kept doing what she was doing. And I was like, and so I kind of melted in my chair. I'm like, she has this. I thought I was excited to communicate with her and see this project the way I wanted it to happen
Right.
go through. And so I sat there and I kind of melted in my chair. She didn't even stop what she was doing. She side-eyed me and goes, are you upset now?
Wow.
3 years old.
Well, and think
Notice.
about you talked about the body language piece too, of her even 3 years old being able to be that insightful and pick up on your body language.
It was incredible. I mean, just that lesson. I mean, she's 3 years old. Like, if she picked up on it, you would think a lot of other people that you're working with will pick up on that too, whether it's addressed or not in a communication. But I sat there and she literally kept coloring and didn't even stop, and she didn't even fully look at me. She didn't stop what she was doing and have this aha moment. It was natural. She was like,
Savage. Yeah.
yeah, she was. I was like, uh and then I'm like, I should respond honestly.
Yeah.
you know, she already has me like figured out. So I said,
Wow.
yeah, I was a little sad. I thought I was going to help you more, but now that you noticed, I'm okay now. And like I said, you're doing great. And that was that. But just the body language piece, and at work a lot of times people will. feel one way, think something, but communicate something different, whether they feel like they're in a safe space or not. So I think that is the piece I am looking at right now, when I look at communication and improving and, leading into having difficult conversations. If, well, I hear what you're saying, but I feel like you look heavier than what you're saying, or I feel like there could be more behind that.
Mm,
Um, and I think that in the workplace, with a lot of people going remote,
yeah.
communication skills have, I think, been so much more essential than the daily work, even when you can see each other and everyone's body language at their desks.
I remember not too long ago, uh, I was on a presentation that I was so nervous about, and my leg is bouncing under the Zoom. It was a Zoom presentation, and my leg is bouncing, and I'm fiddling with something in my hands. And but right now I'm bouncing my leg and I'm fiddling with my hands. Can you tell it all?
No.
And
I mean,
I
when you said it, I started to pay attention, but I had no idea.
right. Like you would never know. And
No.
the person afterwards is like, you just talked about such a difficult topics and you're so calm and present with it. And I'm like, I'm in a full body sweat right now. Like you have no idea what's actually going on. And it's because it's so hard to pick up on those cues. So that's where it comes to, in my opinion, learning to ask better questions, open-ended questions, asking for more information, um, and self-divulging, going, well, I know if I was in your shoes right now, I would be feeling a little bit anxious about this. Are you feeling any of that? Asking those questions to people so that they can open up.
Mm, it's
Questions
so true.
become more and more important in a virtual world. The issue is how do we balance that with good time management? And that's where we're all finding this challenge. And this is new to a lot of us of being able to take time to have deeper conversations and not rush through everything that we're doing and be so focused on ourselves. The last podcast episode that we put up was with Lori Seitz, and it was about mindfulness practices. And
Mm,
a lot of what we're discussing, I think about the mind of a 3-year-old, and they are as clear and present and worry-free as can be.
good point.
And she's able to pick up on your body language because she's present. Meanwhile, you were stuck in your head,
Yeah.
going like, why doesn't she need my help? I wanted to help her, and worry and thinking about 100 other things as we all do as adults. We kind of lose that sense of presence. And so that mindfulness piece plays a huge role. And I would say that as leaders, as we move up in organizations, developing a mindfulness practice, whatever it may be, is enormously important for us.
It really is those pause moments, because your brain, needs time to process what's going on, and having those mindfulness moments is I agree with you, is very important. And in carving out the time, maybe you have, consistent meeting times that can be shorter, but it's consistent, so you can
Yeah.
cover a little, nugget it out versus, long meetings because you haven't had one in a long time and there's a lot to figure out, or yeah, figuring out the time management of how to make time for that, because
Yeah.
miscommunication runs rampant in organizations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I would be willing to bet that like 90, and this is totally made up statistic, but like 90% of issues that take place at work are a result of poor communication or
Yes.
miscommunication, something to do with communication. It is the most important piece of an effective team.
Mm-hmm.
How are
Mm-hmm.
things communicated? What is the vision that's been communicated? Are you speaking to the people? Are you speaking from how you'd want to be spoken to? Are you ignoring important emotional pieces? That's what the whole MIT situation, and with those students, incredibly bright people, but focused more on like um, not all of them. This is a bit of generalizing, but focused more on like an if this then that, like a procedural engineer type of mindset, and which removes the human side of things.
Yes. Yes.
And understanding that we have to really understand each other if we want to be an effective team moving forward.
Yes, yes, and what are you communicating and how it could affect other people on the other side. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Right. I love asking people, what did you hear me say? Just out of curiosity, how did you hear what I just said? I just want to make sure that we're clear on things. Uh,
That's good.
which scared me at first because I'm a notorious people pleaser. And I always felt like that question put people on the spot a little bit. But the clarity that comes from that, and it just depends on, again, my body language, how I say it. If I have a smile on my face, how am I saying that or asking that question? And then we see, did the person really understand what I said? Am I being
Right.
picked up? And then and also repeating back, and that's the active listening piece, repeating back, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you're dealing with X, Y, and Z, or this is really affecting you, or that you're struggling with this part. Is that right? And then you let them move forward from there, and you could continue to build off that conversation.
Absolutely. I have also leaned more so into people pleasing. So I think, the communication piece is so important because, you know, maybe as a child being a people pleaser and not voicing the things that I wanted to voice, and then seeing the ripple effects of that, and then leaning into, okay, well, I'm going to step out of what I normally do to communicate and try, have an act of bravery to communicate better and then keep doing that. Um, where was I going with that one? Passive communication. Oh, so what I've learned too in the workplace that if you're not communicating what you want to communicate, that does start to build in a relationship, and then that's where passive aggressive conversations come
Yep.
in. And I'm trying to help the situation, but I'm still really mad about this thing, but I never said it, but they don't know I feel this way. And then all of the line of communication is then pretty much convoluted. It could still be effective, but there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So, which leads back to having tough conversations again and again and again.
And again and again and again. You're right, exactly. Until you actually get at the root of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's where there's so much of that self work that has to be done as just, I mean, look, as an adult, I was going to say as a leader, as an employee, but it's really just as an adult, we should constantly be developing ourselves and doing personal development, leadership development, and getting to know ourselves and understand where we can improve and
Hmm.
what's maybe holding us back. There's this really cool, I mean, this is like rammed home all last semester for us, but it was called the immunity to change model that basically says that we all have places we want to go in our careers or in our personal lives. And even though we want to be there, and we may be working hard towards it, for some reason, we're not getting there. And it usually means we have something called a competing commitment, where maybe you have a belief of, I believe in strong communication and open communication. Yet every time that's your forward facing value, right? But then every time that somebody brings something difficult to you, you snap at them, or you don't take it the way that you should have, or you're not productive with it. So then people stop openly communicating with you because they're afraid of you. And then ultimately, the competing commitment there is not your reaction, but it's the idea that, just this is just an example, but in this situation, that I'm not capable, or I'm worried that people are going to bring me problems that I can't fix. So I value open communication, but I'm scared of that with that communication is going to come issues that I can't help with.
So that's competing commitment.
Competing commitments.
Okay. I could see that. I could see that. That makes sense. Um, and then did you learn what to do to work through that? Just being aware, self-awareness is probably a first step.
So it starts there. So you basically start to then see where it pops up. I mean, it's a long process. So this is definitely one of those things that, again, it's
Yeah.
like that adult development of how we move forward in our lives and become better over time. And we're undoing habits and fears that are deeply rooted from our childhoods, usually. But you basically start to recognize it at first, and you just take a month to see where it pops up. and not change anything. And then you start to put together a plan to change. And usually you want to have somebody who's holding you accountable, and you start putting up together a plan and you start changing the behavior slowly over time.
Now, how do you think that that would apply in the corporate world for like leadership training? Because I know there's like organizations they have um, like their own company leadership training. Like at the ABC company, we have this leadership training, but it's really for the company and for the product that we have or sell or provide. And then there's like mentorship training that's like maybe for the whole person. Have you found that there's an organization that focuses as deeply as having coaching that would help develop the whole person in leadership?
Yeah, so there's developmental coaching that is intended for the corporate space. So that's actually a piece of where I'm going into and what I'm starting to do with people, but it's a long-term process. So also the mentorship piece that you talked about, oftentimes training the mentors in these types of things, having them go through the process first with maybe an outside consultant, and then they can bring it and then sort of pass it down throughout the organization as new generations are coming in.
Mm,
But it's, yeah,
that's
it's
the other
part of
thing,
it.
all the generations in the workplace.
Yeah, which again, that's talk about that with communication. I mean, that's a huge piece. Um, and I think that's a challenge that I think there's lots of books written on, but in reality, that's one of
Reality.
those things that we talked about before we got on of I think there's lots of theories on how to handle conversations between, let's say, like the Gen Z and the boomer generation of like how to improve effective or make a communication effective. But in reality, that's really hard to do.
It's true. It's true. I have the full range on my team.
Wow. Okay. So how do
Yeah,
you find yourself adapting to the different people? And like, what can you give some just very broad general examples of what communication looks like to the older generations and the younger generations and how you change?
I would say like a snap thought that I had when you said that is um, when I mention something either on a virtual platform and any communication and I put it out there, I know that in this, I don't know if it's general or just the people individuals on my team, but just having different people on your team, I know one of the people on my team, she'll have read the email, she will have ear tagged it if she had questions, and she will not talk to me about it until I bring it up or we have a one-on-one meeting. So
Okay.
knowing that if I need a quicker turnaround, I'll reach out to her. Hey, you got that email? Because I know she has something to say. And then I just address it and help her right then and there. But the communication's usually just once. So she reads it because I know she reads it. Then I'll have somebody else. Oh, I saw something about that. I skimmed it on another person. So I know that that person's probably just going to skim it. They're going to read it later, but not really, they didn't find it that important. So I'm going to call. Hey, did you see that email? Yeah. Okay. Then we're going to read it together. Then I'm going to ask if she has any questions. Then the next day, I'll probably, depending on the level of what it is, if it's something new, I guess I'm assuming that this is like a new communication. I might call her the next day. Hey, did you have any questions after you've been now that do you have
Mm.
any outstanding questions? Anything that's lingering or that you didn't know how to do? I think the boomers, if it's something new, takes a couple of levels of communication versus maybe they're Z, right? I'm
Yeah.
I'm a millennial. They're
Yeah. Gen Z.
Z. Um, usually takes the information and runs with it more so.
Right. So
So
like the boomers specifically want to be told what to do. It's funny because you say boomers, like every time I say it, it feels derogatory, but it's not. It's just the name of their
no,
but it felt like I was just saying like a bad word.
baby boomers.
Yeah. They typically want to be told specifically what to do. And then I know with Gen Zer, it's like they want like an outline of what to do and then given the freedom to do it however they need to. It's
Yes, very much so. And that I do experience exactly what you said.
yeah. It's tough. And then getting them to communicate with each other and to change their communication, which I find easier to have for boomers to get them to change their communication style or to adapt to the Gen Zer. The Gen Zer is less likely to, or doesn't want to waste the time of having to adapt. They kind of just go in with their full authentic self, and they, or at least
Agree.
what they think is their authentic self going to. So it's really difficult, and that's where, like, I guess communication training comes in,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
or
I've
having one
asked,
consistent communication model.
oh, like a framework of communication, and that's how the team would communicate through.
Yeah. So like just having one general consistent model that everybody has to communicate through and everybody has to adapt to.
Mm,
And then you can nuance it the way that you are, but reaching out and making sure everybody's understanding each other and kind of being the director there, but then having just one model that everybody speaks through. And I think that's also where, like, corporate culture comes in too. It's like, what is your lingo at your corporation? How do you communicate effectively? How, there's like a whole culture piece there that should be developed, or that also happens naturally over time.
hmm hmm Which I've been thinking about a lot lately. So right now we're hybrid, so we work from home and in the office. And I think that's a good model that's working for us right now. But I've been thinking about it heavily that when you're in the office with people full time, the level of culture that builds because humans naturally mimic each other
Hmm.
for the good, just naturally, whatever the habit might be, it gets mimicked. So that engagement in that culture, I my
Wow.
in my opinion, is so much thicker and which allows for, I think, more grace
Yeah.
in a
Wow.
workplace.
That's such a good point.
And I think that's a lot of the communication things that are popping up now in the current have to do with, if I'm at home the majority of the time, I'm in my house or wherever I choose my own individual office to be, thinking my own individual thoughts with my two computer monitors and my dog, which, I don't mimic my dog, but when you're in the office, you're out of your personal individual space. You are in everyone else's space and you are now part of a team in
That's
the sense
so
of
true.
being
Yeah.
together. So I think the mimicking piece is really interesting to me right now. I haven't researched it as much, but I think there's something to it.
I get questions all the time of how do you work on a corporate culture in a hybrid setting. And for me, I don't know the answer to that yet. I think it's so nuanced and depends on each organization's approach to things and how they everything. It's like it's such a hard question to answer. But you bring up such a good point, is that there is a bit of, you're just, when you're hybrid or everybody's working remotely, there's that missing culture piece where you kind of do all meld together a little bit. I'm sure there's a way to do that in hybrid, but I
Mhm.
don't know what that is. You're so right. Everybody sort of is their own individual in a hybrid world, and they don't come together and build that culture. It looks very different. So that's really interesting. Be a great experiment.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in for it. If you find something out, tell me because I'm very interested. 'Cause you're right. It can be done hybrid. It can be done remote, but I think that I don't know that a lot of companies have figured it out yet on
Yeah.
how to keep it going because I don't know that this hybrid's going away anytime soon. But
I think no matter what,
uh,
you have to bring people together at even quarterly. Like there has to be a weekend or something where people are getting to know each other. How can you develop compassion and empathy and care for the mission and for your team if you're just never together? I just don't see how that's possible. Like, yeah, I have to get to know you and to be within your vicinity to be able to feel close to you
yes, yes, I
and loyal too.
yes,
How do you
yeah,
develop
because
loyalty when you're far away? It's so much easier just to send you an email, say I quit, and I've never met you in person.
yeah, that like you said, the compassion, the empathy, that piece isn't quite developed like it is when you are in person. I was meeting with a mentor and I said, it was optional, virtual or in person. And I was like, due to schedules, virtual is a great option for me, but I really want to meet you in person the first time.
Yeah.
Can we just meet in person and then we can go virtual? Then we have the option to meet each other again if we want, you know?
Yeah.
But that in person thing, because um, yeah, I think the human energy, in fact, I don't know all the details, but like, I know we have an energy to ourselves and you can feel that when you're in person, but you don't really feel the same energy from your two monitors at home
I
as much with
agree.
the person on it.
And yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I think it's just there's a different level of bonding that occurs virtually versus in person. I used to, when I worked with teenagers in my last company, there was a treatment center that referred a lot to us. And I would do like a recovery coaching or life coach, like, that type of stuff, leadership coaching really with teenagers. And they were leaving a treatment center. And my rule was, I'm more than happy to coach them virtually. I need to come see them at the treatment center at least 3 times before they're
Mm,
discharged to get to know them. And I would take them out on little exercises, or we would go do like I'd bring them to one of those rage rooms or bowling or something, do some activity together so we could feel a closeness before they go and they have some trust there. Because otherwise, I'm just another person on the screen that they can flick off and be like, screw you, dude. I don't care what you're
I'm
telling me.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, like it made it so much more difficult. Also, with even with my school, um, it's a hybrid program. So I
Mm,
spend a good 80% of the time virtually online and on discussion boards and on Zooms with all these people. But every single semester, they call it residency. We have a week in residency where we all have to fly to Boston and we all have to be in the classrooms together and doing these engagement exercises and exploring the topics we're learning about
mm.
together there in person. And I feel so close to these people because of that. I trust them. I mean, there's so much that comes from that that I wouldn't have if we didn't do that. Orientation was mandatory in person. I had to fly to Boston for orientation.
Oh.
Like they made it like you need to get to know these people, spend 2 days with them intimately with these people, and then you could start the program.
Smart.
Which I'll tell you
Smart.
from my master's was very different. It was virtual the entire time. I couldn't tell you a single person's name. I don't know anybody. I never got to know another student. Never. It was completely siloed by myself.
Hmm. It's a different experience. Not, there's good outcomes from it for sure.
I don't feel emotionally attached to where I went and got my master's. I feel very emotionally attached to where I'm getting my doctorate
Your
now.
doctorate.
I feel very
Hmm.
attached to the people I'm with. I know them. We're working hard together. I feel supported. I
Yeah.
never felt any of that with the master's
Before.
program. So
Huh.
it just speaks to the only reason I'm saying this stuff is it just speaks to what you're talking about of and going back to the main topic of communication, that there's certain things that have to be handled in person, but
Mm.
also being
Hmm.
able to have specific events where we are in person to get to know each other, to know where if I have to meet with you virtually and tell you something difficult, you know my heart already. You know
Yeah,
where I'm coming from.
absolutely. We have a new hire in our company that's a leader, and we have an event in California next week where I'm going to get to meet him and then see my other peers I haven't seen in a long time. And I was like, in my head, I said, "Oh, I'm excited to get to meet him." Although I've already seen him multiple times and talked to him um, on Zoom and different platforms. But I was like, "Oh wait, I guess I'm not meeting him. I'm meeting in person." So it was communication wise, it was even interesting internally. I'm like, okay,
Yeah. It's so
so.
weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, the whole COVID thing when like I remember meeting so many people during COVID and meeting them on Zoom. And then I run into them in person and I introduce myself. And they're like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
we had that Zoom in January. I'm like, bud, I don't remember you at all. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. And so now sometimes I find myself, nice to meet you, see you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've actually learned to start saying, great to see you. Because it
Great to see you.
applies
It
whether it's a
does.
first
It's
meet or not.
fine.
Great to see you,
Yeah.
just in case.
Great to see you. And being with my company for so long, we were only in person. We had no remote employees in our organization. It wasn't a thing. So then we go through this pandemic and come out on the other side with new people that we hired, and things would come down, leadership roll out this or that. I'm like, you have to remember they weren't here in
Right.
person. They don't, it's not natural for them. They don't,
Right.
it's not like it used to be. It's not like we've always done.
Wow.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, so
that
that
goes back to what you said.
communication.
Yeah, it goes right back to it and back to also knowing yourself and what you're reacting to. Going like, this is
Yeah.
frustrating because this is how it used to be. It's like, well, that's not how it is anymore. Being adaptable,
Yes. Communication, adaptability,
it all goes
think.
together
Yeah.
for sure. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and enlightening our listeners. Is there anything else that you would like to throw out there? Any plugs you want to make? Anything that you want to share with us before we end the episode?
I mean, a plug, I guess, for Apple One. We are in the we are in the Apple One recruiting business, and we do focus a lot on communication and bridging those gaps, especially on the temporary side. Like if a company has a project going on, needs to be temporary, we do bridge the gap with different open-ended questions to help manage the individuals. So I don't know, there's just a plug for Apple One. Okay.
Okay,
But
can you tell me
also,
what Apple One? I was going to ask you this earlier, but wasn't sure if you
oh yeah.
wanted to talk about what is Apple One? What as a company, what do you do?
So Apple One, it's the largest privately held staffing firm in America, and we focus on full staffing services. So we help mostly office positions. We dabble a little bit in light industrial, but where our core business is helping individuals find work in office space, whether it's, a receptionist, entry level, or a C-level executive. We help, we're a third party recruiting firm for organizations who are looking for those services. So if a company is looking for an HR director and they're looking on their own, but they feel like need some support, they need it quickly, they want to keep it confidential, different reasons, they would reach out to Apple One to open up the search for us too. We'll work alongside of you. We'll bring additional candidates, and we save companies probably 15 to 20 hours of onboarding time to bring somebody on quickly, because we
Wow,
interview people all day long, so that's what we do. So we help get people in quickly, and qualified, and then if it's on the contract or temporary side, we help manage that individual too with our communication tools that we have.
great. Wow, that's incredible. I may be reaching out to you for a job soon. Uh,
Sounds great. I'll be here.
all right. Well, thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And everybody who is listening, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you leave a like, a thumbs up, wherever you're listening to it. If you're on YouTube, though, and you're watching this, I ask that in the comment section, you just comment one thing that you learned from this episode. I always like to hear that feedback and understand what you've learned. If you didn't enjoy the conversation, which I can't imagine, but if you didn't, just keep moving. You don't got to say anything. I'll take negative feedback all day long, but the 1-star reviews can affect my the listeners. We want to make sure this gets out to people. So you liking, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff really helps the podcast and this information get out to more people. So thank you very much. And Peggy, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Blake.